Tonight's story is about an old dog, a quiet man, and a neighbor who mistook silence for weakness. She tried to rewrite the rules to ban, to bully, to erase, but what she didn't know was that her past had already written a story of its own. This isn't about shouting or spectacle, it's about truth surfacing in time, and watching someone finally meet the consequences they thought they left behind. If thoughtful, deliberate storytelling helps you make sense of the messes people create in the name of power, feel free to subscribe. There's always another reckoning around the corner. And before we begin, I'd love to know where you're listening from, and whether you've ever had to deal with someone who just couldn't leave well enough alone. I was walking Max past Karen Mitchell's house when my phone buzzed. Max paused to sniff a cluster of daffodils along the sidewalk, his gray muzzle working slowly as he investigated the scents. At 14, his once energetic stride had mellowed to a gentle amble that matched my relaxed pace. I normally ignored notifications during our walks, but since Max had stopped anyway, I pulled out my phone. A Facebook notification showed someone had commented on my post about the upcoming neighborhood block party. I tapped it open, expecting a question about logistics or offers to bring a dish. Instead, Karen Mitchell had written, "Are aggressive dogs allowed at this event? Some of us have young children and don't appreciate having them terrorized during community gatherings." I stared at my screen, momentarily confused. There was only one dog she could possibly be referring to. I looked down at Max, who had settled onto his haunches, already tired from our short walk. His cloudy eyes gazed up at me, his tail sweeping gently across the sidewalk. "Come on, buddy," I said, giving his leash a gentle tug. "Let's head home." Once back in my kitchen, I sat down and carefully typed a response. Max is 14 years old, always on a leash, and has never shown aggression toward anyone. He's been a fixture in this neighborhood for over a decade without incident. I set my phone aside to prepare Max's dinner, measuring out his senior formula kibble and adding the joint supplement that helped with his arthritis. As I placed his bowl on the floor, my phone chimed again. Karen had not only responded but created an entirely new post in the neighborhood group. She'd shared a blurry photo of Max that appeared to be taken from a distance. In the image, Max was clearly yawning, his mouth open wide, but the angle and poor quality made it look as if he was baring his teeth. "This is what I have to worry about when walking past Thomas Patterson's house," read the caption. "This dangerous dog lunged at me today. Parents beware." I felt a surge of anger rise in my chest. The accusation was completely fabricated. Max hadn't lunged at anyone in years, physically couldn't lunge with his arthritic hips. And I had been with him the entire time we were outside. I typed out a response explaining that the photo showed Max yawning, not displaying aggression, and that I had been with him all day with no incidents. I kept my tone measured and asked her to remove the misleading post. Karen responded within minutes, claiming she had multiple witnesses who had seen Max's aggressive behavior. By then, other neighbors had begun commenting, some expressing concern about their children's safety. For the next hour, I found myself in the surreal position of defending my elderly, gentle dog against increasingly wild accusations. According to Karen's evolving story, Max had a history of lunging at children, had once broken free from his leash, and was a known problem in the neighborhood. I finally stepped away from my phone when I realized my hands were shaking. Max had placed his head on my knee, looking up at me with concerned eyes. I scratched behind his ears, his presence calming me. "It's okay, buddy. We know the truth." The next morning, I took Max for his usual walk, trying to put the Facebook drama out of my mind. But I quickly realized something had changed. Trisha Adams, whose children had always rushed to pet Max, hurried them inside as we approached. Jim Cooper, who normally stopped to chat about his own departed lab, crossed to the other side of the street. By the third such encounter, the pattern was unmistakable. People were avoiding us. The following day was worse. I overheard Lisa Murray at the mailboxes warning a newer resident to be careful of the black lab on Oakwood Drive. When she saw me, she quickly ended her conversation and walked away without making eye contact. On Thursday, I stopped by the local coffee shop where I'd been a regular for years. As I waited for my order, I noticed Brian and Sarah Kennedy whispering and glancing in my direction. When I nodded hello, they gave tight smiles and moved to the far side of the shop. The final straw came that afternoon when Max and I were passing the playground. I heard a mother call out, "Children, come away from the fence," as if Max were a wolf prowling the perimeter rather than an elderly lab who was more interested in napping than anything else. I felt my face burn with embarrassment. I'd lived in this neighborhood for 16 years. People knew me. They knew Max. Yet somehow, in the span of a few days, Karen had managed to transform us into neighborhood pariahs. That evening, after settling Max on his bed with a dental chew, I sat down at my computer. I needed to understand what I was dealing with. Who exactly was Karen Mitchell, and why had she targeted us? I started with her Facebook profile, which was surprisingly public. Karen documented seemingly every aspect of her life: her morning coffee, her workout routine, her opinions on local restaurants, the achievements of her children. She'd moved to our neighborhood from somewhere called Maple Creek about 3 months ago. Her posts talked about a fresh start and leaving negativity behind. There were photos of her new house, her children at their new schools, and frequent complaints about local businesses that had failed to meet her standards. But something struck me as odd. For someone who shared so extensively, there was a complete absence of any specific mentions of her life in Maple Creek. No reminiscences about favorite places. No posts tagging old neighbors or friends from there. No specific reason given for the move. It was as if she'd erased that chapter of her life entirely. The more I looked, the stranger it seemed. I found posts from 6 months ago mentioning Maple Creek in passing, but they were vague. Then there was a gap of about 2 weeks with no posts at all. Unusual given her typical posting frequency, followed by the announcement of their move to our neighborhood. I sat back, rubbing my eyes. Why would someone who overshared about everything else completely omit any specifics about their previous community? The obvious answer was that something had happened there, something she didn't want following her to her fresh start. Max whined softly from his bed, and I realized it was well past midnight. I shut down the computer and got ready for bed, but sleep eluded me. I lay awake, replaying the events of the past few days, trying to make sense of Karen's vendetta against Max and me. By morning, I knew what I needed to do. After feeding Max and taking him for a brief walk, keeping to the less populated routes to avoid the stairs, I picked up my phone and called my cousin Emily. She'd worked at the Maple Creek Community Center for years and seemed to know everyone in that town. "Hey Tom," Emily answered, her voice warm. "How are things? How's the old pup doing?" "Max is fine, considering his age," I replied, "but we've run into a situation with a new neighbor. I was hoping you might be able to help me with some information." "Sure, what do you need?" I took a deep breath. "Do you know anything about a Karen Mitchell who used to live there? She moved here about 3 months ago with her family." There was a moment of silence on the line. Then Emily's voice came back, her tone completely changed. "Oh, that Karen? You might want to sit down for this." I nearly dropped my phone at the change in Emily's tone. The warmth had vanished completely, replaced by something close to dread. "I should have warned you when you mentioned a new neighbor named Karen," Emily said. "I just never thought she'd end up in your neighborhood. Trust me, there's a reason nobody in Maple Creek misses her." I grabbed a notepad and pen from the kitchen drawer. "I'm all ears." Emily took a deep breath. It started innocently enough. She joined the Maple Creek Facebook group and introduced herself as passionate about clean living and community standards. Everyone was welcoming at first, but within weeks she turned it into a crusade. I scribbled notes as Emily continued. Karen had first targeted a local bakery, claiming they used cancer-causing ingredients in their pastries. When the bakery owner posted the actual ingredient lists, Karen changed tactics, suggesting they were lying and demanding health inspections. The owner, Mrs. Chen, had run that bakery for 20 years without a single violation. Her business dropped 30% after Karen's campaign. She had to let 2 employees go. "All over made-up claims?" I asked. "That was just the beginning," Emily said. She went after a 4th-grade teacher next, claiming the books in his classroom were morally corrupt, demanded he be fired. The poor guy had been teaching for decades, never had a complaint. Max wandered over and rested his head on my knee. I scratched behind his ears as Emily detailed how Karen had organized a group of parents to attend a school board meeting with printed excerpts from classic children's books, taken completely out of context. The school board stood by the teacher, but he took early retirement the next year, said the stress wasn't worth it anymore. I felt a chill. So she's done this before, targeting people, manufacturing outrage. The worst was what she did to Lynn Carver, Emily said, her voice tightening. Lynn was a single mom, worked 2 jobs. Her daughter was a bit of a tomboy, liked to wear her hair short, preferred jeans and t-shirts to dresses. I stopped writing, already sensing where this was heading. Karen reported her to Child Protective Services, claimed Lynn was confusing her child's gender identity and causing psychological harm. Can you imagine? CPS had to investigate, of course. Lynn was devastated. Her daughter was questioned at school. Their whole life was put under a microscope. That's horrible, I said, thinking of the sweet family down the street Karen had already complained about for their excessive Halloween decorations. What happened? CPS found nothing, obviously, but the damage was done. That was the final straw for Maple Creek. After word got out about what she did, the whole town basically shunned her. No one would talk to her. Her kids lost friends. Even people who'd supported her earlier campaigns backed away fast. I glanced at my notes, seeing the pattern clearly, and now she's doing the exact same thing here, starting with my dog. Classic Karen move, Emily said. She picks targets carefully, usually starts with something most people won't bother defending too strongly. A bakery's ingredients, a teacher's book choices, or an old dog, I finished. Once she gets traction, she expands, makes bigger accusations, gathers supporters. By the time people realize what's happening, she's positioned herself as the neighborhood watchdog. I looked at Max, now snoozing by my feet. The idea that he was just the first target in Karen's new campaign made my stomach turn. I need to stop this before it goes further, I said. Do you think people from Maple Creek would be willing to share their experiences? Are you kidding? They'd be thrilled to warn your neighborhood. I can send you contact information for several people. Mrs. Chen from the bakery, Lynn Carver, a couple others. That would be incredible, I said. And Emily, would you be willing to write up what you know? Something official from your position at the community center? Already drafting it in my head, she replied. I'll email it to you tonight. After thanking Emily, I hung up and immediately created a new document on my computer. I titled it simply, Karen Mitchell, Pattern of Behavior. Then I took Max for a quick walk, my mind racing with what I'd just learned. When we returned, my email was already filling with messages from Emily's contacts. Each one told a similar story about Karen. Initial friendliness followed by increasingly outrageous accusations, manufacturing evidence, rallying supporters, and targeting vulnerable community members. Mrs. Chen sent screenshots of Karen's posts about her bakery, including one where Karen claimed to have gotten violently ill from a pastry, posted minutes after Karen had shared a photo of herself enjoying brunch elsewhere. Lynn Carver's account was the most detailed. She forwarded email exchanges with the school principal, screenshots of Karen's posts suggesting her daughter was being confused, and even a redacted copy of the CPS report closing the investigation. Her message ended with, "I don't know you, but I know Karen. Stop her now before she destroys someone in your community." Throughout the afternoon, more evidence arrived. A local reporter from the Maple Creek Gazette sent me a link to a story they'd written about the community conflict following the CPS incident, carefully worded but clearly showing how the town had turned against Karen. The HOA president from Karen's old neighborhood sent minutes from meetings where Karen had raised increasingly bizarre complaints, everything from the color of mailboxes to the type of flowers people planted. By evening, I had dozens of screenshots, testimonials, and official documents. I organized everything chronologically, creating sections for each major incident. I included names, dates, and direct quotes. Where screenshots showed potentially identifying information about children or other innocent parties, I carefully redacted those details. As I worked through the night, Max occasionally got up to check on me before returning to his bed. Around 3 a.m., he needed to go out briefly. The neighborhood was silent and dark as we took a short walk around the block. I thought about how many of these houses contained people who now believed I had a dangerous dog. Back at my desk, I added a section about Karen's campaign against Max, including screenshots of her original post with the misleading photo and the subsequent comments from concerned neighbors. I didn't embellish or editorialize, the facts spoke for themselves. Emily's official statement arrived around 4 a.m. It was perfect, professional, factual, and damning. She outlined Karen's escalating behavior in Maple Creek from her perspective as a community center employee who had witnessed the division Karen had created. As dawn broke, I added a simple introduction explaining that I was sharing this information not out of malice but out of concern for our community. I wrote, "I believe people should be judged by their actions and their history. Before we allow anyone to divide our neighborhood, we should understand their past behavior and patterns." I reviewed the document one final time, checking for accuracy, tone, and completeness. It was comprehensive without being vindictive. It showed a clear pattern without making accusations beyond what the evidence supported. Max stirred in his bed as sunlight began filtering through the blinds. He looked up at me with rheumy eyes as if asking if I'd been up all night. "Just about done, buddy," I told him, scratching under his chin. This isn't about revenge, it's about making sure what happened in Maple Creek doesn't happen here. I saved the document and prepared to share it with my neighbors. After feeding Max his breakfast, I would post everything I'd learned. The truth would speak for itself. I clicked post at exactly 7:30 a.m., watching as my carefully assembled document appeared in the neighborhood Facebook group. After a moment's hesitation, I'd chosen a straightforward title: Before we let strangers define our community, let's make sure we know who they really are. No accusations, no pleas for sympathy, just facts. Max nudged my leg, reminding me he needed his morning medications. I closed my laptop and focused on caring for him, measuring his arthritis pills into a small bit of peanut butter, the only way he'd take them without a fuss. His tail wagged slowly as he licked the spoon clean, unaware of the digital bomb I'd just dropped in our neighborhood's virtual town square. After getting Max settled on his bed near the window where he could watch the birds, I checked my phone. In just 20 minutes, the post had accumulated 17 comments. By the time I'd made coffee, that number had doubled. I scrolled through the responses, my hands shaking slightly as I held my mug. Some were expressions of shock, others of vindication. Then came the personal accounts. "She reported my Halloween decorations as satanic last month," wrote the Garcia family from 3 streets over. She even called the police, who looked confused when they showed up. Now it makes sense. Michael Wu from the corner house added, "She tried to get my landscaping business shut down after I refused her demand for a neighborhood discount. Said my equipment violated noise ordinances and that I was operating illegally. The county inspector found nothing wrong." More stories poured in, each one revealing another person Karen had targeted since arriving in our neighborhood. The yoga instructor she'd accused of running an unlicensed business when classes moved to the park during renovations. The teenager she'd reported for suspicious behavior when he was just delivering newspapers. The family with the autistic child she'd complained about for disruptive behavior at the community pool. Each story matched the pattern from Maple Creek. Karen would make an accusation, escalate it when challenged, gather supporters through fear-mongering, then position herself as the neighborhood protector. The only difference was that she hadn't had time to build momentum here until she found Max and me. My phone buzzed with a text from Lisa Murray, the woman I'd overheard warning others about my dangerous dog at the mailboxes. "Tom, I am so sorry. Karen told me Max had bitten a child and the parents were too scared to come forward. I should have checked with you directly." I sat back, relief washing over me. I hadn't realized how much the past few days had affected me until I felt the tension beginning to drain from my shoulders. By mid-morning, Karen had noticed the post. Her first comment appeared beneath a cascade of neighborhood stories. "This is a coordinated attack by people who don't know me. I'm being targeted because I stand up for safety." No one engaged with her directly. Instead, more neighbors continued sharing their experiences. An hour later, Karen posted again, this time claiming she was being bullied by a mob. When someone responded with specific dates and screenshots from Maple Creek asking for explanation, her reply became more frantic. Those incidents were misrepresented. The Maple Creek community was toxic and unwelcoming to newcomers. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Around noon, my doorbell rang. I opened it to find Jim Cooper, the neighbor who had crossed the street to avoid Max and me days earlier. "Tom, I came to apologize in person," he said, looking genuinely embarrassed. "I should have known better. Max has been the gentlest dog in the neighborhood for years. Karen got in my head with all her talk about children being at risk." "I appreciate that, Jim," I said, genuinely touched by his directness. "Robert called an emergency HOA meeting for 7 tonight at the community center," he added. "He's asked people to bring copies of any communications they've had with Karen. Thought you should know." After Jim left, I received more texts and even a few phone calls from neighbors expressing similar sentiments. Each one eased the sting of the past few days a little more. By mid-afternoon, my post had over 100 comments. Karen's denials had grown increasingly desperate. When confronted with Lynn Carver's account of the false CPS report, Karen claimed she had legitimate concerns and was just trying to protect a child. When someone posted the redacted CPS report showing the case had been closed as unfounded, she accused them of violating her privacy by sharing government documents. Every defense she offered only dug her deeper into credibility issues. Her final comment before she stopped responding altogether read, "You're all going to regret believing these lies. I have documentation of everything." Max and I spent the afternoon quietly. I took him for a longer walk than usual, noticing how different the experience felt from the previous days. People waved from their yards. A couple stopped to ask how old Max was and comment on his dignified gray muzzle. No one hurried their children inside or crossed the street to avoid us. As evening approached, I fed Max his dinner and made myself a sandwich. I hadn't slept in over 36 hours, but adrenaline kept me going. I was curious about the emergency meeting, but had no intention of attending. I'd done my part by sharing the information. The neighborhood could decide for themselves what to do with it. Around 6:45, I decided to take Max for his final walk of the day. Our route happened to pass by the community center, at least that's what I told myself as we headed in that direction. The parking lot was completely full, with cars overflowing onto the grass and lining both sides of the street. I'd never seen so many vehicles there, not even for the annual holiday party. Through the large windows, I could see the meeting room was packed, with people standing along the walls because all the chairs were taken. Max walked slowly beside me, sniffing occasionally at interesting spots. As we passed the open door of the community center, I caught fragments of conversation from inside. "Can't believe she tried the same tactics here. Targeted Tom and his dog first because she thought no one would defend. Pattern of behavior that's absolutely consistent." People were already deep in discussion before the meeting had officially started. I saw Robert Johnson at the front of the room, organizing papers, his expression serious. The crowd quieted as he moved toward the podium. Max tugged gently on his leash, ready to continue our walk. I hesitated, torn between continuing on and seeing this through. Just then, Lisa Murray spotted me through the open door and waved. "Tom, you should be in here," she called out, loud enough that several heads turned my way. Robert looked up from his papers, making eye contact with me. He nodded slightly, a silent acknowledgement that my presence would be valuable. I glanced down at Max, who seemed content to rest after our walk. The community had rallied around us. Perhaps I owed it to them, and to myself, to see this through. "Wait here, boy," I said, looping his leash around the bike rack near the entrance. It was a mild evening and he'd be visible through the door. This shouldn't take long. Max settled onto the cool concrete with a contented sigh as I stepped inside. The room fell momentarily quiet as people noticed me. Then a murmur of supportive comments rippled through the crowd. Someone in the back row stood and offered their seat. I nodded gratefully and made my way through the packed room, accepting quiet words of support with brief smiles. As I found a seat at the back of the crowded community center, Robert called the meeting to order. I'd done what needed to be done by sharing the information. Now I would witness how the community chose to respond. I settled into the offered chair, nodding thanks to the neighbor who'd given up his seat. The community center meeting room felt uncomfortably warm with so many bodies packed inside. Robert Johnson stood at the podium, shuffling papers and clearing his throat as conversations gradually quieted down. Through the open door, I could see Max resting contentedly by the bike rack, his gray muzzle on his paws. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice," Robert began, his voice carrying easily through the room. This emergency meeting was called to address concerns about community harmony and the spread of potentially harmful misinformation. He didn't need to mention Karen by name. Everyone knew why we were there. I noticed several people had printed copies of my document, some with highlighted sections and notes in the margins. Robert continued, "Before we begin, I want to establish that this is not a witch hunt. We're here to discuss facts and experiences so our neighborhood can make informed decisions about how we want to interact with each other going forward." The room remained respectfully quiet as Robert explained the meeting format. Each person would have 2 minutes to speak if they wished to share an experience or concern. He emphasized that speculation and hearsay would not be permitted, only first-hand accounts. 15 minutes into the meeting, the side door swung open. Karen Mitchell strode in wearing a crisp white blouse and tailored pants, a confident smile fixed on her face. The room fell immediately silent. She scanned the crowd, her smile faltering slightly when not a single person would meet her gaze. "Sorry I'm late," she announced to no one in particular, her voice too loud in the quiet room. Traffic was terrible. She took the only available seat near the front, her back straight and chin lifted. I could see her scrolling through her phone, apparently unbothered by the tension in the room. Robert cleared his throat. "As I was saying, we'll now open the floor for community concerns. Please raise your hand if you'd like to speak." At least a dozen hands shot up. Robert pointed to Lisa Murray first. Lisa stood, clutching a folder to her chest. "I'd like to share my experience," she said, her voice steady despite her obvious nervousness. 3 weeks ago, Karen approached me at the mailboxes and told me that Tom Patterson's dog had lunged at her child. She showed me a photo that appeared to show the dog baring its teeth. Karen's head snapped up, but Lisa continued. I believed her and started warning others. Yesterday I saw the same photo in Tom's post, with context showing it was actually just the dog yawning. I checked my text from Karen, and it's definitely the same photo, just cropped differently. Lisa held up her phone, displaying the text message. I want to apologize publicly to Tom. I should have verified before spreading what turned out to be a deliberate misrepresentation. Robert thanked her and called on Michael Wu next. For the next hour, neighbors took turns sharing their encounters with Karen. The pattern was unmistakable. Each story mirrored what had happened in Maple Creek. The yoga instructor described how Karen had threatened to report her for running an illegal business after being asked to follow the class guidelines. The teenager who delivered newspapers recounted being followed by Karen in her SUV while she took photos of him trespassing on people's property. The parents of the autistic child explained how Karen had demanded their son be banned from the community pool for disruptive behavior when he'd had a brief sensory episode. Through it all, Karen's expression shifted from confidence to disbelief to barely contained anger. She typed furiously on her phone, occasionally shaking her head or scoffing audibly. When someone shared information that directly contradicted something she'd claimed, she would mutter, "That's not true," just loud enough to be heard. Finally, after the Garcias finished describing how Karen had called the police about their Halloween decorations, claiming they were satanic imagery, inappropriate for children, Karen's hand shot up. I think I should have a chance to respond to these ridiculous accusations, she said without waiting to be acknowledged. Robert looked at her calmly. Karen, you'll have your turn to speak like everyone else. This is clearly a coordinated attack, she continued as if he hadn't spoken. I've been nothing but concerned about community standards since moving here. She stood up, phone in hand. I have documentation of everything. Screenshots, photos, recordings. I can prove that dangerous dog lunged at me. I can prove the Garcia house had inappropriate decorations. Karen, Robert interrupted, his voice firm but not raised. Please take your seat. You'll be called on in due course. You're all going to regret this, she said, looking around the room. I know my rights. This is defamation. This is harassment. Nobody responded. The silence seemed to unnerve her more than any argument could have. Robert consulted his list. Jim Cooper, you're next. As Jim began speaking about how Karen had tried to get his children's basketball hoop removed as a safety hazard, Karen remained standing, her face flushed with anger. This is absurd, she finally exploded. You're all believing lies from people who don't even know me. What about my side of the story? Robert placed both hands on the podium and fixed her with a steady gaze. I think we've heard enough from you, Karen. The room fell absolutely silent. Karen looked around, seemingly expecting someone to defend her. When no one did, she grabbed her purse, muttered something about contacting her attorney, and stormed out of the meeting. After the door slammed behind her, the tension in the room visibly lifted. Several people even chuckled nervously. Robert called the meeting back to order, and we spent another 30 minutes discussing how to move forward as a community. I believe we've reached a collective understanding, Robert concluded. Going forward, any accusations from certain individuals should be viewed with extreme skepticism and independently verified before action is taken. Additionally, I want to formally apologize to Tom Patterson on behalf of the HOA for not investigating the initial claims about his dog more thoroughly. As the meeting adjourned, several people approached me with personal apologies. I accepted each one graciously, understanding how easily Karen's manufactured evidence and confident delivery had swayed them. Max had dozed off outside, barely stirring when the doors opened and people began filing out. Jim Cooper stopped beside me as I collected Max's leash. That was something else, he said, shaking his head. Never seen anything like it. I hope we never do again, I replied. The following morning, I noticed Karen had deleted all her inflammatory posts about Max from the neighborhood Facebook group. By afternoon, she had left all the neighborhood groups entirely. Her online presence had vanished as thoroughly as her credibility. 3 days later, I was walking Max when I spotted a for sale sign being hammered into Karen's front yard. The real estate agent smiled and waved as we passed. I returned the gesture, feeling neither triumph nor schadenfreude, just relief that the neighborhood could return to normal. Over the next few days, the atmosphere completely reversed from the frosty reception Max and I had experienced the previous week. People who had hurried their children inside now encouraged them to come pet the sweet old dog. Jim Cooper crossed the street deliberately to walk alongside us rather than to avoid us. Lisa Murray brought Max a bag of specialty treats as an apology. "He's such a good boy," she said, scratching behind his ears as his tail wagged slowly. I feel terrible for believing those stories. Max has already forgotten about it, I assured her, which was true. Dogs don't hold grudges, a trait I was trying to emulate. 1 week after the meeting, Max and I were taking our evening walk when we passed Karen's house and noticed her SUV parked in the driveway, hatch open, filled with boxes. Karen herself was carrying a small houseplant to the vehicle. She glanced up as we approached, then quickly looked away, busying herself with rearranging items in the car. Max, oblivious to the significance of the moment, paused to sniff at a fire hydrant near her property line. I could have said something. I could have given in to the petty satisfaction of watching her squirm. Instead, I simply continued walking, Max's leash loose in my hand, giving the elderly dog all the time he needed to investigate the interesting scents along our route. As we turned the corner, I heard Karen's car door slam behind us. I didn't look back. There was no need. The neighborhood was finally at peace, and Max and I could go back to our quiet life together.